Do you struggle with feeling inadequate at work? Watch today's video for 7 signs of imposter syndrome at work. My name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, own of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. All right, let's jump into this week's video. Let's start off with what is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is actually a term that was coined in the 70s by 2 psychologists. They called it the imposter phenomenon. They noticed this kind of trend with high achieving women where regardless of how much they were achieving, how well they were doing, they still weren't internalizing it. They were still feeling like frauds or imposters. So this is where the term has really developed and where it's really kind of evolved over the years. So generally it's this sense that you just feel like a fraud, that you downplay your accomplishments, you just never feel good enough when it comes to like work or your intelligence or your successes. You kind of feel like you're going to be found out. Someone's going to learn that you just maybe got lucky or that you're just really hardworking, but that you're not smart enough or you don't know enough to really do well in this position. Start with sign number 1. So one sign is honestly you tend to overwork. So because you feel like you don't know enough, you're not smart enough, you feel like a fraud pretty much, you compensate by working more, you overwork. Maybe you take on more tasks than your colleagues, maybe you don't set boundaries and you'll check the email at all hours of the night. So you tend to add more and more to your plate to kind of compensate for this feeling of feeling inadequate or not good enough at work. Although that leaves you feeling exhausted, potentially resentful, and overwhelmed. The second sign is really going back to the definition is that you don't really internalize your successes or accomplishment. You attribute it to every other reason except your actual like merit or you doing really well. You kind of attribute it to like maybe you got really lucky, or maybe you're just really nice, or your boss is really nice, or maybe you just knew someone. So you just find any other reason to downplay your accomplishments. And so that's really hard because even if you're in a high achieving position, no matter what, the story in your mind still finds a way to downplay how you got there and find other reasons why that's the case. Another sign is you have this intense fear of failure. So it doesn't have to just be associated with imposter syndrome, but in general, I notice that people who struggle with imposter syndrome, that they are afraid of failing. So that might lead to not really sharing ideas, putting themselves out there. Maybe that might lead again to overworking, or the opposite, really procrastinating because there's this constant fear of failing. If there's a potential fear of failing, I'd rather just not do the work, or just the thought gives me so much anxiety that I don't engage in doing the activity or task. Another sign is you tend to underestimate your ability. So let's say your boss is like, hey, I want to give you this new project. There's a lot of new, exciting, innovative things, but you tend to downplay or doubt yourself whether you have what it takes to actually do it. Even though clearly if your boss trusts you with that, there's some sense that he or she believes you can actually do this. Maybe that also looks like there's potential promotion or a job opening that you could apply for, but you tend to underestimate your ability whether you can actually do it, so you don't apply. You kind of stay in the safe, comfortable zone of the job that you already know what to do because you underestimate your ability to actually do it. Next sign is that you might engage in the imposter cycle. So if you can see from the screen here, this was done in the original kind of paper that they talked about, that they noticed like this is concern about not being smart enough, right? So that kind of tends to start off, that's like kind of at the core here, this fear that you're just not smart enough, right? You're a fraud. So then you tend to overwork, do more, do a lot to really make sure that you're not found out. You get the good grade or positive feedback, whether that's at work, you get like a good positive praise that you did well on this project, you get the approval, maybe temporarily you feel okay, but once again, this fear of not being smart enough just creeps in, right? So no matter what you do, you don't tend to internalize the results or the outcome because you still struggle with this fear that you're not smart enough, and that still leads you to engage in overworking, right? So this imposter cycle, if you kind of notice where you are in the cycle, you can really start to step out of it. Hello, can you resonate with the imposter cycle? Have you ever noticed yourself engaging in this cycle? And what have been the benefits or results of that? Has it worked? Has it not worked for you? The next sign is really if you struggle with imposter syndrome and you engage in the imposter cycle specifically, you might notice that you end up burnt out, right? So that could be a sign. You might be burnt out from years or months of engaging with your imposter syndrome, right? Because your imposter syndrome, especially if it drives you to overwork, take more on, prove more, not internalize your success, not take vacation or breaks because you have to keep working, then that really might show up as eventually you just burning out and losing just the motivation or energy to do your job. It can show up is really impacting your ability to advocate for your needs at work. So that can look like different ways. So on one end, that can look like reluctance to negotiate salary when you initially get hired. That could look like also reluctance to negotiate like salaries at reviews because again, you're still feeling like not good enough, enough, like you're a fraud, like you are just lucky that you're in this position. It can also look like not advocating for your own self-care, meaning like taking the benefits that are due to you, whether that looks like vacation, taking time off, right? So if there's like Fridays where you're encouraged to take like half a day, you don't take it, you like stubbornly work the whole day. So again, really not advocating for your own needs in different capacities at your job. If you can recognize any of these signs, that's okay. The first step in changing these behaviors is acknowledging them. So whichever signs really resonate with you, it encourages you to like kind of look at like what's driving those behaviors, right? And if it is some of this imposter syndrome, that's okay. It's actually pretty normal and common. And once you recognize it, you can start to really change that relationship with these feelings of inadequacy. I encourage you to watch this video next because there is some overlap between perfectionism and imposter syndrome. So this book that I did a review on is really helpful for that. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you guys. Thanks.